What's up guys, JayzTwoCents here, and I think most people are getting a little bit burnt out on the whole coverage of GTX 1080. And although it is a fantastic card that gets only better with add-in card manufacturers like MSI, Gigabyte, EVGA, most people can't afford a $600 graphics card. That is a pretty high premium regardless of the value of the card. So when it comes to value, just like the GTX 970, everyone wants to know more about the GTX 1070, and that's exactly what we're gonna talk about today. The Master Case 5 and Master Case 5 Pro from Cooler Master combines modularity with creativity, giving you the freedom to build it your way. Make it yours by clicking the link down in the description. Now this video really doesn't need to be that long. In fact, the 1070 here is just a shaved down version of the GTX 1080. Instead of 2560 CUDA cores found here in the 1080, it's got 1920. It's kind of funny the amount of jokes have been going around about 1920 and 1080. It's like some weird number. It makes me wonder if they actually intentionally shaved down the numbers so that they worked out that way. But regardless, I digress. 6.5 teraflops of compute power in this little guy right here. Yeah. 256-bit memory bus, 8 gigabytes of GDDR5. It's not the GDDR5X, but GDDR5. 1506 megahertz base clock, 1683 megahertz boost clock running on the same GP 104 Pascal 16 nanometer FinFET core that we saw on the GTX 1080. So it is quite literally just a shaved down version. Now, just like the 970 and the 980, when those launched back in September of 2014, all of the hype was around the value of the GTX 970, and that really hasn't changed when it comes to the GTX 1070 either. Now, the MSRP is $379 for the add-in card pricing, and the Founders Edition, which I'm holding here, coming in at $449. But as you've seen with the GTX 1080, you are going to see the board partner cards coming in obviously cheaper than the Founders. I would expect sweet spots to be right around $399. Now, although that is more expensive than you were seeing with the GTX 970, the amount of performance that you're getting on this is pretty damn insane. So rather than sit here and show you any more unnecessary B-roll that really serves as nothing more than a way to cover up my face so you guys don't throw up while watching this review, let's go ahead and get right into the benchmark numbers.
Transition.
So what you're seeing right here is a 1 hour looping benchmark of heaven running with extreme tessellation, 1440p, 8x multi-sampling, and everything pushed as high as it would go. And what we were looking for here was to see how GPU boost responded to the 1070 in normal conditions. Some people got mad that I turned the air conditioner off in my 1080 test. So the room was actually just as it would be day to day. I was editing over there on Skunkworks. This went for an hour. Air conditioner was on normal. I think the ambient temp in this room, because of the temperature of the GPU, rose to about 79 degrees Fahrenheit, almost 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It was pretty warm in this room. These were the results. And the reason why I'm showing this is obviously everyone was talking about GTX 1080 and was it thermal throttling. Now let's talk about this for a minute here. I think a lot of people forget on what GPU boost really is. Now, the only clocks you are guaranteed to get with an NVIDIA card is the base clock, not the idle clock of 140 megahertz, whatever it is, but the base clock being what it ramps up to when it sees a 3D load. And in this case, that being 1506 megahertz, it's actually represented right here in green as the minimum value. That's the clock you're guaranteed to get. Anything above that is GPU boost working by dynamically monitoring things like power limit and temperature limit to see, hey, do we have more headroom here? Are we just sitting here, floating downstream, or can we actually, turn this bitch up and get some more power? So we went all the way up to 1835 when the card was cool, before we actually saw us bumping against the upper limit of the temperature limit. Once we hit the temperature limit of 82, which is the way it ships out of the box, and you're going to hit 82 with the reference cooler, I guarantee it, we saw the core clock come all the way back down to 1721. Now that's a great number, and the reason why I say that is the boost clock on this card is 1683. So we are, 48 megahertz faster than the boost clock while bumped up against the temperature limit. Now, although people will argue 82 is too hot, the fan wasn't running fast enough, the fact that it was still able to achieve a faster than boost clock while at the temperature limit, to me, is actually pretty impressive. Now, if we were to see this core clock come back down below the 1506 mark, then we would see what's known as thermal throttling, where it's actually trying to save itself from dying because it's getting too hot. So even if it came down below the boost clock, but was faster than the base clock, GPU boost is still a benefit and it's actually working. Now the reason why I mention this has nothing to do with defending NVIDIA, it's just I feel like since the 600 series, when we first saw GPU Boost 1 launch, a lot of people have actually forgotten how GPU Boost works. And just because the frequency is dynamically controlling itself doesn't mean it's thermal throttling. But anything above the base clock within the boost range is actually considered GPU boost, which is just dynamic self-overclocking. And a lot of people seem to have forgotten that. So that's why I went ahead and showed this. I did an hour-long test. Here's the graph. Make of it as you will. And that's pretty much all she wrote about that. The 1070 with the reference cooler, which is notorious obviously for being the hottest coolers on the market, actually did a really good job at keeping the core clocks exactly where they needed to be for a great gaming experience. All right, with all that said, what happens when you actually push the limits of the card, especially with the reference cooler on there? Core voltage is at plus 100 millivolts. We've got a power limit of 112%, which is where one thing to note, this is 112, where the 1080 was 120, and we're doing a plus 175 on the core and a plus 500 on the memory. So I want to see exactly how well this thing will perform. Now obviously on the first test I showed you guys, we hit 82C with everything out of the box. So pushing up voltage and frequency is obviously going to increase the temperature. So to combat that, I'm actually going to set the fan at, I'm going to set it at 90. I'm sure my lav mic's picking it up. But let's go ahead and see what our frequency is jumping up to. And then we'll do a little bit of live gaming here to see how the 1070 does with Doom. I don't have a benchmark suite set up with Doom because it cloud saves and it's really hard to actually get a consistent test going in Doom. It doesn't have a built-in benchmark or anything like that. So I figure live gameplay would be the best way to do it. All right, so we're sitting here at 2050 megahertz, jumping down to 2025, so it is dynamically controlling a little bit. Fan at 90%. GPU is at 170 or 107% load, but on overclocking I achieved anywhere between 2050 megahertz and 1987 megahertz, which is pretty damn impressive for the 1070 considering it starts at 1507. So we saw over 500 megahertz overclock. That's pretty, I mean, that's 30%. Right there, that's a 30% overclock. That's a pretty big deal. But again, even though this is not GDDR5X, it's just G5 as they're calling it now, because I guess GDDR is too hard to say, plus 500 on the memory. So again, 11,000 effective on the memory. That's actually a pretty big deal. So what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead here, I'm gonna load up Doom, and then we'll just do some live gameplay, and then we'll come back with some final thoughts. So we're running 4K. Again, I want to do 4K testing here. Vertical sync is off. You can see the fraps counter there. I'll have to tell you what the OSD is showing. That's just way too small to see. Anti-aliasing I've set to SMAA. Fortunately in 4K you don't need a lot of post-processing when it comes to anti-aliasing. So on the advanced tab here, I'm just going to go with the Ultra preset. I'm not going to do the nightmare settings because maybe we'll test it just to see what happens. But for the initial test here, we're going to do Ultra. But what we're looking for here is to see how the FPS does in 4K here, obviously with a GTX 1070. So right off the bat, you can see we're sitting here about the 50 FPS mark. Sorry about there being no sound. I have no speakers hooked up, even though they're sitting right there. I found a secret. Wow, I've been looking for this thing. Wow, I almost walked off the end of the world. I'm so bad at this game. Oh, hello. Jeez. Whoops. You know what's interesting is even though the FPS is below 60, I'm not feeling it too much. It doesn't feel terrible. Wow, so we went all the way down to the 30s here on this scene. Core clock is sitting at 1974, 2012, 1987. Ooh, double barrel. This was like the awesome gun in the original Doom, man. The double barrel shotgun. Everyone loved some double barrel action. All right, so I'm gonna go back down to 1440p. Wow, and you can see the FPS obviously jumped up quite a bit. Oh geez, what is this guy? Holy hell. That guy's huge. So this was that gameplay you just saw, all of the testing there. This was about 20 minutes worth. You can see right here, we stayed well over 2,000 pretty much through all of it. Dropped down to the high 1900s, 1974, 1949. Looks like 1949 was the lowest it hit for just a moment there. But yeah, it stays really consistent. And our max temperature we achieved was 77, right there towards the end, 77. So yeah, that's not too bad considering it's a under $400 card from the board partners that's gonna get you 4K performance. Most people don't have $700 to spend on a graphics card like the GTX 1080, but that's why the 70 series card and the GTX 1070 is a fantastic value. Like I said, this card, the Founders card, is $449. Expect to see them under $400 when the board partners launch, and you're going to get an amazing gaming card like you just saw, capable of 4K gaming, fairly stutter-free. Yeah, it went anywhere between 35 to 55, but that 35 was only for a moment. I'm a FPS snob and I didn't perceive any sort of stuttering or terrible gameplay, but most people also aren't gaming at 4K. 1440p is only really starting to become affordable, and as you saw, we achieved well over 60 FPS at 1440p with Ultra presets in Doom. So that's a very, very, I think that's great for the gaming community. More gamers are going to be able to start experiencing better settings in their games without having to literally take out a mortgage to afford any of these gaming components. Now, obviously, when the board partner cards come out, we're going to see better thermals, better noise, and hopefully better clocks. Although I'm telling you right now, the Founders cards I have overclock very well. I don't think they're cherry-picked by NVIDIA. I think they just perform very well. But obviously we're now starting to see custom boards available here for the 1080, and we will see those for the 1070, giving us better thermals, better acoustics, and hopefully better overclocking. So you're gonna see this guy here very soon. This is the 1080 Gaming X 8G. We'll be putting this thing through its paces and seeing exactly how it performs. It has an extra power connector, so we're gonna see, does that extra power connector actually get you better performance? But you guys have to wait for the next video to see that. Anyway guys, thanks for watching as always. I will see you in the next video.